This stream is sponsored by Brilliant.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
EDT pressure looks good.
Traveling up. Roger roll with Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Echo Delta nominal.
Flight down by SC off. Again, SC off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
And good afternoon and welcome to Launch Complex 41 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where you are looking live at an Atlas V rocket, which is fully fueled on its launch pad and hopefully ready to take the USSF-12 mission for the United States Space Force into a near geostationary orbit. I'm Chris Gebhardt, the Assistant Managing Editor for NASASpaceflight, and joining me today for commentary for the liftoff is the one and only Alex. Alex, how is it going this evening for you?
Well, we just had a little bit of a Raptorside chat before, and now we're gonna have an Atlas V launch? Question mark. I'm good. I'm a little bit anxious to see some launching today, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Indeed, we will, and we will definitely get to that in a second. But also joining us on comms is Julia Bergeron. Julia, how is it going?
Why, hello there, Chris. It's a mixed bag out here right now. To my left, I see a rain wall, but right over the pad, I see clouds, but it looks okay so far. So, happy to be out here.
There we go. And in the background, pushing the buttons and pulling the levers, making this all possible, is none other than Michael Baylor. And also out there also out there at the press site with everyone for photography is Mr. Stephen Marr. He is not on comms, but he is definitely out there as part of our team. But someone else who is on comms is Mr. Thomas Burkhardt, our news director for NASA Spaceflight. How's it going this afternoon, Thomas?
It's going well out here, Chris. We are hoping that the weather will cooperate, like Julia said. Still some weather systems in the area, but ULA and their team, as well as the teams at the 45th Space Wing, or the 45th Weather Squadron, I should say, are monitoring the weather and looking for a gap where they can get this Atlas off the ground. Today's window extends until 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, which is midnight UTC. And they are still optimistic that before then, they will have a chance to get this rocket through the weather and out on its way to orbit. So we'll keep you updated. We've got our live view of the rocket on the pad. The rocket's fully fueled and ready to go. All it's doing right now is waiting for the go-ahead to start its flight. So we'll see if they can pull it off today.
Indeed. And let's talk a little bit about where we are in the hold. We are expecting a weather briefing, the next weather briefing rather, in about 6.5 minutes from now at 6:55 local time. However, ULA did provide an update just a couple of minutes ago that while the sensor issue that was a technical anomaly that had also held them up earlier, although the weather hold was already in effect, so kind of canceled it out in that regard. Even though the teams have have cleared that issue and technically the Atlas and ground systems are ready to go, there are still 4 weather rules that are being violated right now, including cumulus clouds, anvils, lightning, and surface electric field mills. All of those things are basically saying lightning, both naturally occurring and triggered. And what we mean by that is there's lightning that can naturally be triggered through just like it naturally does in the air when you see a thunderstorm. But the rocket's exhaust contrail itself also lowers the overall electrical potential needed to trigger a lightning strike as the rocket is accelerating through the dense lower atmosphere. That is called triggered lightning, and that is also a main concern. And triggered lightning is involved with cumulus clouds, the actual storm clouds themselves, as well as anvils, which are the tops of electrical storms, which are blown away from the storms. and out over a given area. So definitely watching for that, and the surface electric field mill indicating that that electrical potential in the atmosphere is very strong right now at the ground and aloft. So we will wait to see exactly what the weather squadron says here. They had originally predicted less favorable conditions in the first hour of the window and improving conditions later on. So we will see what that prediction is here in about 4 minutes. But Thomas, I know you have already been through a phase 2 weather warning and shelter in place because of the lightning, correct?
Yes, we are back out safely now, but just as a, in an abundance of caution, as we say here in the industry, we were sheltering in our cars out here at the press site for a little bit. We are perfectly safe here at the press site. The rain has gone away from us as well. So really what we're looking at is the chances of weather coming back towards specifically the launch pad, of course. That's where the teams will be looking because it only takes a few seconds for the rocket to get above any of that precipitation or lightning risks. So right now, that's what the teams are going to be looking at. But the weather has started to clear out, and we're hoping that it's going to continue to cooperate later into the window, so those rules can go green and we can go for launch.
Indeed, and I already see the questions mounting. So we'll just hit one from Musical Wolves about those 4 towers. Those 4 towers are the lightning protection system, which was very important today, not just in the weather system that came over you earlier, Thomas, but Tori Bruno was also noting that they did have a lightning strike very close to the pad during the count operations earlier in the afternoon as well, but no adverse effects from that strike or any of the others that have been occurring in the last few hours. So things still going well, but that is definitely why we want our protection systems there. Alrighty, so let's let's start in as we wait for that weather brief here. Let's start in with some questions. And this is an interactive stream. We are here to answer and take all your questions and answer them as we can. So please, if you do have a question, tag us at NASA Spaceflight in chat, and we will do our best to see all of them and enter them into a queue that we will go through as Atlas. Holding right now at T-minus 4 minutes and seeing what that weather briefing will hold. But the first question that we have here actually regards the sensor issue that was out earlier. No, all we know right now is that it was a sensor anomaly, but that they were able to clear it and that it is no longer an issue for liftoff. So that's where we stand with that one. Rough Rider Show asking very timely with the rough weather at Kennedy, do you think they will delay SLS rollback by a few hours? Thomas, any word on SLS's roll that was expected to start here in about an hour?
Yes, NASA has actually let the media know that SLS will remain on the pad overnight tonight, and that first motion for rollback to the VAB for those final pre-launch preps is now no earlier than Friday evening at around 6 o'clock time here at Cape Canaveral. So SLS will stay put for the evening. They did not say anything about whether that was a result of Atlas V operations continuing on or the weather systems in the area or some combination of the two, but we can report that SLS rollback will not take place tonight and will take place tomorrow night as the current plan.
Alrighty, there we go with that update on how the weather is currently affecting SLS out there as well. Saul, here's a good question. Is the Atlas V fully fueled now? Also, what does 541 mean for everyone here who does not know yet? Alex, would you like to take that one?
Yeah. So yeah, right now the Atlas V rocket is fully loaded right now, and they're just in the top of mode, which is basically the boil off of the liquid oxygen in both the stages and the liquid hydrogen on the central upper stage. Those are being continually topped off as it keeps boiling. And but the apart from that, it's fully fueled right now. And about the other question about what 541 means, the 5 comes from the size of the fairing, so it means it's a 5-meter diameter fairing. It's actually like 5.4 or something like that, but it's rounding up, actually rounding down. Sorry. So yeah, 5-meter diameter fairing, 4 solid rocket motors on the booster, and then one single RL-10 engine on the upper stage, on the center upper stage. That's what it means.
Alrighty, there we go. Yeah, and so as you see here in the graphic too, the Centaur upper stage for the Atlas when it flies with its 5-meter diameter payload fairing is actually completely enclosed within the fairing during the initial ascent
Yeah.
phase. Yeah, and it's got additional Centaur forward load reactors in there to help balance some of the loads and stresses around there. So when Atlas is ascending with this 5-meter fairing, you see the fairing come off first, and then a few seconds later, that Centaur forward load reactor separates as well from the vehicle during the ascent. And yes, and I think the other major thing with this particular configuration of the Atlas with the 4 solid rocket motors for today is that these are solid rocket motors from Northrop Grumman. They are the GEM 63s, which are slightly shorter versions of the GEM 63 XLs, which will be launched on the Vulcan rocket. So Northrop Grumman is getting some good performance data on the GEM 63 design overall before stretching it a little bit for its use on Vulcan either later this year or early next year is when Vulcan's first flight is scheduled for, and it will definitely have solid rocket boosters on it as well.
Also, another thing that I should say, just
Mhm.
because ULA likes to talk about that, and I memorized some of these names, is the name of this configuration. They call it the Dominator. They have usually names for each configuration, and this one is the Dominator.
Indeed. Well, and speaking of different configurations, Mopop is asking, will the Atlas 511 ever fly again? And that's one we actually saw earlier this year, I believe. An Atlas 5-meter diameter payload fairing with only one side-mounted solid rocket motor, and the answer is no. There are no other planned 511 launches, and all Atlases are currently spoken for. So that was it. That was it. And likewise, the 552, the 5-meter diameter payload fairing with 5 solid rocket motors and a dual engine Centaur upper stage will never fly as well, because those were originally going to be for the Dream Chaser, which has now moved over to the Vulcan rocket. So, yeah, some configurations of Atlas will never fly, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are about and overall, Gilles is asking us here how many atlases are left. There are just over 20 atlases left, and a lot of those will be Kuiper satellite launches for Amazon's satellite internet constellation that'll be coming up here in the next few years. So it'll
Yeah.
definitely be a busy flyout of the Atlas 5 manifest.
I think it's about 9 of them, right? Are for Kuiper. It is. I don't remember now. I
Sorry.
always get confused with Kuiper and Kepler. They're like 2 different constellations, and they all begin with a K. I always get them confused for some reason.
Oh, gotcha. Um,
But yeah, nine of
However,
them on that. Oh,
yeah, no, go ahead.
go
Yep.
ahead. Yeah, I was about to say 9 of them on that constellation launches, and also I think at least up to 8 for Starliner. So yeah,
Yeah.
because they have, well, one of them is already launched, which is OFT2, and then the crew flight test, which hopefully later this year, and then the 6 operational launches of a Starliner. So 8 missions.
Indeed. And Taylor with a good question here. Is the RL-10 engine on this Centaur the same one that's used on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage for SLS's upper stage?
I believe, well, they're both the RL-10, but they're 2 different variants, I believe. I believe the
Yeah.
single engine Centaur that you see on Atlas V is the RL-10C, whereas the ICPS, which is basically a Delta 4 upper stage or a Delta cryogenic second stage, uses the RL10B variant. There are plans to evolve which engine variant specifically is used on the SLS upper stage going forward, but at least the one for Artemis 1 is an RL10B, so a slightly different variant of the same family of engines.
And make a decision at that
That's
point
the one
whether
that
they want
extends
to,
the
turn on hydraulics
the.
or do the operational hydraulics.
Always.
Yes, sir. Actually, I'd like to do it at 2320 if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, 2320 weather brief update. Thank you.
Roger. And RCU copy of, we'll plan a another weather briefing at 2320.
RC copy is 2320 Zulu.
Alrighty, so definitely what you heard there, weather still red for the Atlas teams here today, and another weather briefing will be coming up here in 20 minutes from now. And then they will decide what to do from there. The launch window closes in 59 minutes exactly. So there is still a bit of time here, but to remember, the Atlas is currently holding at T-4 minutes, which is a planned hold time for the Atlas, but the hold has been extended from when they entered it, when they were originally targeting a liftoff an hour and 1 minute earlier at 6 p.m. local time. Now that as we are sort of pushing to the end of the window, even though they are holding at T-4 minutes, it will take them about 10 minutes once they get a go from weather to be actually able to launch. And that is because after they get the go from weather, they have to coordinate a new T0 time with the teams and the systems. And once that is coordinated, they then have to do the launch readiness poll, which is conducted at launch -7 minutes. And then they go and pick up the count at T-4 and count down to 0. So even if weather were to go green at 20 or 18 minutes from now in the 7:20 p.m. weather brief, they would not just be able to launch 4 minutes later. They would still need at least 10 minutes. So all of that is sort of to say, the further into the window they go and the closer to the end of the window they push, the tighter that actually gets to be able to pick up the count in a reasonable amount of time and get off the ground before the window closes. So still a ways to go, but we will have to see on that. And slight correction to what I just said, the weather briefing is at 7:25, not 7:20. So expecting that here just over 20 minutes from now. But keep your questions coming and make sure to tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. Questions about ULA, the rocket, the mission. You can see that the weather isn't all bad at the Cape, and that is actually looking north toward the pad. So you can see it's not all terrible and doom and gloom out there. So hopefully we will get a hole in the clouds here for the Atlas today. But yes, so here's a good question, Alex, for you.
Okay.
Why is the first stage called a booster in this rocket when it's got boosters strapped onto the booster?
Yeah, I believe that's sort of a little bit of a history there with previous iterations of the Atlas rocket, especially the original one where you had the sustainer stage and then you have like the booster stage, sort of like that. And yeah, I believe that's sort of the origins. I'm not sure the actual reasoning why they somehow kept that until
Yeah.
now.
Well, so
But yeah,
there's actually it's sort of just before we started strapping other the things we now consider to be boosters,
yeah,
right? Especially since we consider them solid rocket boosters.
exactly.
Uh, the way early rocketry used to work is that first stage was to literally boost you out of the denser lower atmospheres for your more efficient upper stages to take over. And that nomenclature has just sort of held. So when you have so really any first stage of a rocket could be considered the booster, like Falcon 9's first stage is the booster. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, they're called booster and then they get a serial number. And that's literally just because
Mm.
they boost it out of the dense lower atmosphere. So the trick here is like just like the Falcon 9, just like you can bolt 2 other Falcon boosters to it and you suddenly have a Falcon Heavy. Well, Atlas's heavy configuration is just bolting solid rocket motors to the side of it, which are
To
just
interject here really
yes.
quickly, just another official update from ULA. We're still waiting on the next weather briefing. However, the latest weather briefing also included a note that that basically, and here's the direct quote from ULA: "Optimism is fading that storms will clear by the end of the window." So they haven't given up quite yet, but the projections seem to be indicating weather might not cooperate in time for today's window. Again, the window extends for about another hour. They're open till 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. And right now they're at T-minus 4 minutes and holding. So they only need 4 minutes to get this rocket off the ground. But we will continue to keep you updated as they continue to monitor the weather here in Florida.
And storms are definitely still to the north of the pad and not moving. We mentioned earlier that the storms are very stationary. They sort of built up on and around the area, but the ones to the north are not dissipating and are staying stationary. And it is those that are sort of creating some of the anvils that are now part of the concern. Anvils being the tops of thunderstorms that get blown away from them. You can see them there actually higher up in the atmosphere. The whiter clouds are the anvils, where the more darker storms down below. But that is what we are dealing with. And as Thomas noted, ULA also referencing that optimism is fading, that weather will turn green in time, and you can see that that's right there at the launch pad, and we really don't take lightning for granted in the United States. And Atlas itself, not an Atlas V, a predecessor to the Atlas V, was struck by lightning and lost in the 1980s. And that is actually the mission that created the awareness of the major lightning protection rules that were actually needed and the true dangers that a lightning strike could do to a vehicle. A lot of you might remember too, Apollo 12, a human lunar landing mission, was struck not once but twice by liftoff, about 37 seconds and 52 seconds after lifting off from Pad A. Thankfully, was absolutely fine for the most part there, but we don't take lightning for granted and will not violate those lightning launch commit criterias. And the reason here, for a bit of context, the reason that optimism is fading is because that last weather brief is coming up here at 7:25, but the lightning rules require that a launch be held until 30 minutes after lightning is detected in a storm that is within 10 nautical miles of the flight path. And that timer is what needs to expire. And the storms that are still actively producing lightning are within or at that 10 nautical mile boundary. So that's what they're facing, is even if they were to get the last lightning strike at 7:30, they would need that full 30 minutes and then do their launch pulls and then lift off. So you can see how optimism is fading here, and that 7:25 is going to be the decision point from the lightning perspective of if we're going to even be able to attempt today. So I've been talking for a while. So Alex,
Let's just
let's
saying that on the back channel.
yeah, this is a good question to sort of get to get someone else's voice on stream here. Why does ULA have planned holds? Why not simply just set the launch time like SpaceX does and just go for it?
Yeah, I've been seeing so many questions about that because people are used to see a lot of SpaceX launches. They're like, why do they hold and not restart? Just move the sequence to T-0 starter. And there are reasons for that. And it's because on the last minutes of the launch countdown, that's when the rocket and the ground systems get very, very active. Things like pressurization of the tanks, software is, switched in such a way that, the rocket is in control of the countdown. Things like the switching of the power to internal or things like that. So things get very, very active as soon as you go deep into the countdown near T0. And actually, SpaceX used to hold the count before the super cool propellants. So prior to this, they used to have a couple of holds in their countdown too. One of them, if I remember correctly, was like at T-10 minutes. That was before the chilling of the rocket engines, and before the Stromback was retracted. Actually, the Stromback was retracted back then at that point. But yeah, like the reasoning for the holds in their case is just because there's so many things going on that you gotta pause for a moment and make sure that everything you've done until that point is okay, and then you go out and do the rest of the things. Now, why does a SpaceX not do this? That's a good question, and it's mostly related with a technical readiness of the rocket. They try to have so many things already at the rocket, from a technical standpoint and from a fueling standpoint. They leave that way closer to the T0 moment, and so that allows them to be able to not have any holds, planned holds, obviously. That being, once they are into the countdown, into the fueling sequence. But SpaceX can actually hold the count. We recently had yesterday a 2-hour long window for SES-22 launch, and that launch could actually have been held before propellant loading, so that if there's any bad weather, for example, and they are not loading still the propellant on the rocket, they can just move that and wait until the weather clears, and then they start loading the propellant on the rocket. They can even hold while they are loading the propellants in the rocket. If they are doing that at the first half of the window, sort of like that, and the window is long enough, they can actually hold, detank the rocket, and then reload propellants again and try it again at the end of the window, or sort of like near the end of the window. They actually have that capability, and so yeah, the whole thing here is that different providers just have different steps to how arrange their launch countdowns, and in this case, it's just ULA tries to pause and make sure that everything is just going well, whereas SpaceX just does a ton of checks before propellant loading, and then they also leave the propellant loading as far and as close to the T0 as they can, as far into the countdown as they can.
There we go. And Musical Wolves with a good question here. Given that the engines on the Atlas V booster are Russian engines, the RD-180s, do sanctions take effect, or since they were in the US already, are they not affected by the sanctions? So basically, ULA kind of, yeah. I mean, basically, they are affected because they have to switch to Vulcan. This is the whole reason that Vulcan is coming round, is because they were prohibited from buying more engines. So sort of the stock that they had is what they had to use up, and this is what limited the number of Atlases that were left. So yes, they were affected, but they can continue to use them to fly out the Atlas manifest. But this is why this is basically why Vulcan came to be in that regard. Okay, so here's another good question that we've got. Someone asking why the Atlas can't launch from other launch sites. And it can. This is Atlas's Florida launch site. So this is what it uses for geostationary missions and inclined missions, like up to the International Space Station and stuff like that. But it also uses Slick 3E at Vandenberg, and it launches out of Vandenberg for other Department of Defense Space Force missions that require polar or sun synchronous orbital inclinations, which is so the Atlas uses the West Coast for those. And another good question that we had here too, why doesn't the Atlas use solid rocket boosters on the West Coast for its launches? It does. Many Atlases have launched with solid rocket motors from Vandenberg.
Yeah.
So it just totally, whether an Atlas has solid rocket motors or doesn't, and how many solid rocket motors it has is really just a function of the mass of the payload and where the payload needs to get. And that dictates how many solid rocket motors you put on the vehicle.
There's also another factor at the West Coast, is that you may not
Yes.
see the SRBs.
Yes, the
You
Vandenberg
can only
fog
hear them.
machine.
Yikes.
I know, I've already been fired by Jack, I guess.
Uh, Thomas, here's a good question coming in from Keith too. If they have to scrub tonight for weather, would they leave Atlas on the launch pad or roll it back to its vertical integration facility, which is the big building that says ULA on it,
Yeah.
right under the
Yeah.
Brilliant.org logo? Which also thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring this live stream too.
No doubt about who owns that building. ULA logo front and center. But no, the rocket will stay out at the pad. We've talked about many times. It's got its own lightning protection system, so it's plenty safe sitting out there overnight. They do have a backup launch opportunity the same time tomorrow, 6:00 p.m. local time, and the rocket would patiently sit out at the pad for that launch opportunity. The only time they would roll back to the VIF was if we were looking at a hurricane or something, they'd probably do that. Or if they need to work a technical issue that required them to roll it back to work on that, they'd roll it back. But no indications of either of those factors.
There we go. And another question related to ULA and this launch pad here. Have we seen any Vulcan Pathfinders, and will Vulcan use this pad? Greetings from Odaham, UK.
Good question. We have seen, well, I guess it depends on what you call a Pathfinder. We've seen one very bare bones Pathfinder that they brought to the VIF, the VIF, to like practice lifting the booster vertical and placing it on the mobile launch platform for Vulcan. It was basically like a stick down the middle with some weights on either end so that the center of mass was in the right place and the mass was the same, but it wasn't even a cylinder. Later on, they sent what is basically a fully functional Vulcan booster. It had placeholder engines. They weren't operational BE4 engines, but it was more or less a complete first stage booster, and that booster will actually fly on a later mission, not the very first one. But there will be a later flight with that booster. They called it a Pathfinder of some sort, but it will later become Flight Harbor. So we've seen some Pathfinders come through Pad 41, which is the East Coast launch site for Vulcan.
And you know what's also cool about Pad 41, Thomas? That VIF right there actually can process Vulcan and Atlas. So they've done work internally with the platforms, and that makes this very unique because although we can see with SpaceX on 39A, you can do a Falcon and a Falcon Heavy, correct? But they're still basically the same family of rocket. What makes 41 unique is Vulcan, sure, it does use heritage hardware, but in size and structure, it is different than an Atlas as far as how they're going to process it. So you're looking at a very unique building there, and it's one of possibly the only ones, Tori said, that has the ability to do that.
Indeed. All right. And as we continue to wait for that next weather brief, which is ultimately most likely going to be the main decision point of whether or not they have enough time left in the window to continue tonight or not. Going to continue to take some questions, but we're waiting for the launch of the Atlas V with the USSF-12 mission, which is a mission for the U.S. Space Force, which is intending to bring 2 satellites into orbit tonight. WFOV, Wide Field of View, which is a Space Force Systems Command test satellite, as well as USSF-12 Ring, of which that's pretty much all we know about it and the orbit it's going into. But for the wide field of view, Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about that particular payload on the Atlas here today?
Sure. So that payload is actually being used by the Space Force to detect missiles being launched by the baddies, so to speak. Yeah, it's part of a huge program. Actually, the United States Department of Defense has different programs working in unison for the same thing. They have like SBIRS, for example, next month. We're gonna see launch of that, hopefully. And this one actually is testing some new technologies for that particular, for what we think might be the next generation of those kind of satellites, missile warning satellites that the Space Force is going to be deploying. And actually, now that I think about it, I think there was also talks about perhaps the the satellite manufacturer, which is L3 Harris, it's also building some other. You know, the Department of Defense has many programs, as I said. There's another upcoming program, which consists of on low Earth orbit satellites. In this case, this one is going to geostationary orbit, actually directly with this launch. If it actually launches today, it's being put directly by the rocket, and the Space Development Agency, a part of the Department of Defense, they're gonna be deploying a low Earth orbit constellation, which is gonna be made of different layers, and one of them is a tracking layer, and that's gonna be the one that it's gonna be going and with multiple satellites, they're gonna be able to detect all of these launches. And the satellite manufacturer for the Wide Field of View satellite that is launching today, well, hopefully, again, is also the same one that is manufacturing some of the detecting mechanisms on those satellites. So there's probably some connection there where this mission might test some of those components. There might be. Okay.
See new cumulus clouds forming just west of the pad. So things are actually looking worse than they were on the last briefing. It's looking more confident that we will remain no-go through the end of the window. It also looks like you could get some rain at the pad shortly after 0Z, with the stuff filling in and moving towards the east-northeast. And we'll keep monitoring that and notify you if it looks to be moderate or heavy precip. And here's our other radar, which shows the anvil clouds extending well south of the pad. It looks like we could clear the attached anvil clouds perhaps first, around 0Z, but the problem is really mainly our lightning will keep us no-go. We've got fresh strokes really just outside of 5 nautical miles to the north of the pad, and red is the latest. We also have stuff trying to creep in from the south, right at 10 nautical miles on the western edge, trying to creep in from the west. So we would have to have no red strokes inside that 10 nautical mile ring by 23:28 Zulu in order to get the 30-minute countdown timer to go down by, for us to notify that we're green for the lightning roll, to go down in time for the last minute of the window at 0 Zulu. Not only that, we are still red for the surface electric field mill rule, and they have not started to count down or their 15-minute countdown timer yet, and they will not start to count down until we get a little bit of a cool off in the lightning within about 10 nautical miles of the launch pad. But we expect to clear the cumulus cloud rule last, with all of these cumulus clouds associated with thunderstorm activity moving in from the west and continuing to remain within 10 nautical miles. They are all well above the height for a within 10 nautical mile concern, the cumulus cloud rule, and we expect them to stick around inside of 10 nautical miles through 0 Zulu. So we have updated our estimated clear times for the surface electric fields rule for 0Z, the lightning rule, and the cumulus cloud rule for 0030Z, 30 minutes after the end of the window, and the attached anvil cloud rule for 0 Zulu. This concludes the weather brief. Are there any questions?
RC has no questions. Indicate questions are acknowledged. LD.
Hello, stand by just one moment.
Standing by.
I'll jump in really quick while they finish up this weather briefing. The weather is continuing to deteriorate.
Hello, would like to
They have
check
not
back with you
yet
one more
given up
time.
on today's window
Hold on,
officially, but that
give
could
us
be
one more
coming in a
update.
little
It's,
bit.
23:30.
We're going to stay tuned to
Copy that.
see if they can work
No other
out
questions
any
from
path
LD?
forward for the.
Copy. MD.
No other questions from MD.
LV1.
LV1.
And DE.
D.
Thank you, OWO.
Alrighty, so you could hear there in the weather brief that things are definitely not looking good for the Atlas V here today. There was a lot of talk, particularly from the weather officer, that they would be able to clear the weather. They would be able to clear one of the weather issues first, being the anvil cloud rule, but they were expecting that around 8 p.m. local time, midnight UTC. And that is the end of the window. They were also talking about fresh lightning strikes within 5 nautical miles of the launch pad. The weather rules state that the last lightning strike within 10 nautical miles of the pad has to be 30 minutes before operations can resume. And basically what that would mean is that they would need the last lightning strike to occur at 7:28 p.m. and no more strikes from there, and that would theoretically allow them to maybe lift off at the end of the window if everything else cleared. But they were talking about times for clearing everything being well past the anticipated close of the window. ULA saying that another weather briefing is planned for 4 minutes from now, which would be the decision point at that point, just based on how long that 30-minute clock needs. So we will continue to stand by for what that final weather brief will be. But while we are doing that, we're going to keep taking your questions here. And again, a lot of people are asking about the weather. It's not the wind today that is the constraint. It is lightning. So it has nothing to do with Atlas V's engines or anything like that being able to counter wind. It's the lightning, and the lightning is the thing you don't mess with, because an Atlas V in 1987 was struck, not an Atlas V, an Atlas rocket in the late 1980s was struck by lightning after leaving the pad, and it actually fried the guidance system, rocket flew off course, and had to be destroyed. Apollo 12 was struck by lightning twice. They lost the computers inside the command module, but they got it back by the SEC to aux button. That's a great story, but we don't take lightning for granted because it can destroy the rocket. It can significantly damage the payloads, so we don't take that for granted. 3 minutes to the next weather briefing here. Spales, I hope that answers your question about how bad things can get with weather and lightning. It can destroy the rocket, is what it can do. So we don't mess with it. Here's another good question that we've got here. Aren't they solid rocket motors for United Launch Alliance and not solid rocket boosters? And this gets us to the age-old question: what's a solid rocket motor and what's a solid rocket booster? So in some regards, the name is interchangeable. It means the same thing. I have always had it personally told to me that if it is a single cast, if it is just the motor and it's not segmented together with another motor, it's a solid rocket motor. If you start getting into multiple sections getting mated together to form a larger booster, then it is a booster. So like SLSs are technically boosters because they're composed of 5 propellant segments. These GEM 63s would technically be solid rocket motors because they're single segments, but at the end of the day, it's kind of interchangeable, but that's how it's been explained to me. Alrighty. So as we continue to wait, oh boy, look at that sky behind Atlas there, Alex. Don't you just want to experience a Florida thunderstorm, Alex?
No, I'm okay. I'm okay with the Spain weather. I'm okay here.
Yeah.
Even
So
though it's very
every
hot.
every time I hear a rumble behind us in the sky, I kind of cringe, y'all.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. And Mark has a good question here. If the weather does clear, how long does Atlas actually need? And as we await the next weather briefing, which should begin in a few seconds from now, and we'll stand by to listen in on that if the audio is available. Basically, the last lightning strike within 10 nautical miles would have had to have already occurred about a minute ago. for them to have a shot at this. Nothing is over yet. Final weather briefing coming up here momentarily, and then we will see what the weather officers say and what ULA and what ULA decides. And here is that weather brief.
RC, LC, net 1.
RC on 1.
Please conduct a weather brief, channel 8, weather conference.
Roger. Oh, RC net 8.
This is Elwell on Net 8.
Please stand by.
Standing by.
This is RC on weather conference net 8. Indicate ready to proceed. LD.
LD.
MD.
MD.
LB1.
LB1.
DE.
DE.
Please proceed, Elwell.
Okay, you should be looking at the intercloud lightning. We have plenty of fresh lightning strikes between 5 and 10 nautical miles, both to our west-northwest and to our north. This lightning, there's no way to get out of a 30-minute timer, with the exception of having no cumulus clouds within 10 nautical miles, which is going to be near impossible to do in the next 30 minutes due to the radar and a new cumulus cloud thunderstorm building just west of us and moving in. This is also likely going to give you a moderate, potentially brief period of heavy rain right around 0015 Zulu as it approaches the pad. So things are looking closer to a 99% POV at 0 Zulu. Are there any questions?
No questions from the RC. Indicate questions are acknowledged. LD.
LWO, if you wouldn't mind, could you go ahead and take us through tomorrow's briefing?
Sure. I have not changed the forecast for tomorrow. Honestly, it's
Alrighty, and as you can hear there, the teams are going to brief and getting that briefing on the weather for tomorrow. But what we did hear was the weather officer basically confirming a 99.9% chance of weather violations for today. Noting that the only way to clear the 30-minute lightning rule would be if there were no cumulus clouds in the vicinity, but there are, and in fact, cumulus clouds are building at a new thunderstorm complex that will actually be over the pad at the predicted close of the window is building to the west. So we are still we're standing by for the official notification from ULA, but from a weather standpoint, the weather officer basically. Weather officers never say there's a 100% chance of anything, but when they say 99, that means it ain't happening. But we will wait for ULA. We will wait for ULA and the official confirmation there. But definitely not looking good, right, Alex?
Yeah, it's not looking great. That that 99.9% of violation, that's never good.
Yeah, I can see all the memes forming right now. So you're saying there's a chance. Oh man, 99% odds on weather speak is no. There isn't anything else but what they're telling you is going to happen.
Yeah,
If it were
that's why the weather briefing
20%,
was, there's a 99% chance you'll violate the constraints. Any questions?
Yeah, and then the only question being, can you take us through tomorrow's
yeah,
forecast,
tomorrow's briefing.
which we laugh not to make light of it. We laugh to say, that's the verbal cue of like the launch team arriving at the understanding of what the decision is going to be, but we still need to wait for them to
Officially call it.
make the decision and officially call it. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is, weather red for 4 of our weather rules, as the ticker says there, all of those basically meaning lightning, and various forms of lightning there. So yeah, so again, we'll wait for them to call it officially here, always, but definitely not looking good for Alice tomorrow, or for Alice today.
Go LD.
Mission Director has declared a scrub for today's operations. Please prepare the team for a 24-hour recycle.
Roger, scrub with the 24-hour recycle. We'll proceed into scrub detanking.
And that answers the question too that a lot were asking if they scrubbed today, when is the next attempt? They have officially scrubbed for the day due to the weather violations at the Cape. And the next opportunity will be tomorrow within basically the same window. So man, Thomas and Julia, I know you all are out there in the field. I don't want to hold you guys up here anymore. I'm gonna hit a couple of final super chats really quickly, and then we will hop on out of here. To let you all pack up in enough time. And our final super chat was Andy asking about how solid rocket motors work. And the basic answer to that is they have a solid propellant structure with a core down the middle, and you can shape that hole different ways. It can be perfectly square, it can be square, it can be star patterned or circular, and that basically changes how hot or how cold the propellant burns, which can change the overall energy that you can pack into the booster and how it burns. But basically, there's an arming piston up at the head, which turns an igniter and arms the booster, and then it gets the fire command, which explosively ignites the detonation charge, which ignites the solid propellant in the booster. And once you ignite it, you can't turn it off. You have to burn it until it is depleted, and then you can separate them, which is exactly what they do. And as a lot of people are noting in chat, scrubs, not RUDs, and you would rather be on the ground wishing you were flying than in the air flying, desperately wishing you were back on the ground. So
Speaking
with
of
Atlas
things
5,
are in the air.
yeah, exactly. So with Atlas 5 on the right-hand side of your screen, we're going to point out that they are doing something with what looks to be Starlink apparatuses for Starlink version 2 on a ship over at over at Starbase. So we are going to send you all over there to watch what is happening over at Starbase. But from all of us here at NASA Spaceflight, thank you so much for joining us for what was a scrubbed launch attempt of the Atlas V for the USSF-12 mission. We will be back here to bring it to you tomorrow afternoon. Until then, enjoy what you are seeing on Starbase. Later, nerds.